So thank you all for joining us this morning. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Kelly. I'm one of the directors of Lawrence Dean Recruitment, and we're joined this morning by Sarah Jones. I'll let her introduce herself properly in a moment. Sarah is a qualified and experienced business coach, trainer and speaker, and she's going to be talking to us today about leading and motivating teams remotely, which obviously is something over the last few months that has changed considerably in the landscape of what we're all dealing with and having to learn about at the moment. So in just a second, I'll pass you over to Sarah to give her presentation. If you have any questions as we go through, please do ask them as we go. You can use the chat function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And if you select to send your questions just to me, then I can collate them and put them to Sarah at the end of this call so that you can all hear the answers. That way, if we get multiple of the same question, I can field them to Sarah at the end so that she can focus on her presentation. So I think that's enough from me. I'll pass you over to Sarah. If you would like to introduce yourself, Sarah, and then over to you.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope you've all got your tea, your coffee, your orange juice, whatever your drink of choice is in the morning. As Kelly explained, I'm a coach and a trainer. I specialise in the area of careers, whether that's people who want to shift their careers entirely or want to help progress their careers. And I help companies with succession planning, turning managers into leaders, which I'm sure you will understand are two very different disciplines. I work with teams as well around identifying team dynamics and how that impacts conflict and communication to help organisations perform at their peak performance levels, really. I'll provide a little bit more details about my background in a moment. But this morning, thanks to Leandra, Kelly and the team at Lawrence Dean for inviting me to talk about what seems to be a very popular topic at the moment about how to lead and motivate teams remotely and with confidence. And I want to start off by saying, and I've said this a lot on some of my recent talks, that whilst we're all covered in the same sort of issue, if you like, which is the virus, I think both personally and professionally, we're all in very, very different places. We're all in very unique situations. So it's very hard to apply a one-size-fits-all to many of the challenges that we face. And the word pivoting has really come into play. And that's a word that I really like because it comes from basketball originally. I don't know much about basketball, but I know that pivoting means just making micro movements, just taking a moment to look up, see where you are and make micro movements to adjust your course and pass to your team member and to reach your goal. And I think that's a very interesting word. It's a word that I've used with individuals who are struggling with their mindset around the virus. It's a word that I've used with leaders and managers that I've been working with to really sort of focus on the immediate, focus on the moment and be able to adapt and course correct at an increasing rate of change. So we've all got the same issue that we're facing, but we're dealing with it in lots and lots of different ways. And I'm sure you're seeing with some of your teams that as a leader, as a manager, you're having to maybe deal with things in a different way than you would do usually because everybody's got different childcare arrangements, or you may have employees that are working, living at home, living alone, that might be suffering with loneliness and all sorts of different issues. And we want to make sure that all of our colleagues are looked after and looked after well. So one of the key tips that I've been working with is mindfulness moments. I don't know how much many of you know about mindfulness, but that is very much about stopping and being present in the moment. So the one tip I would start with is really when it comes to pivoting and how you can apply that to a business setting, it's the ability just to stop, take a breath, take some time out for yourself and focus on the present. And I think when the virus first started, that was very much a mindset I was encouraging my clients to work with. Just focus on what you can focus and look at what goals what you can control and influence, what goals can you control and influence, and what simply do we have to let go of? Because we know as human beings, we are wired to like certainty. We like certainty. We don't particularly like change, particularly when it's done to us. So that's something that we have to get used to. And change can present a whole washing machine of emotions: fear, denial, acceptance, ambivalence. We've all got a different reaction. Some people underreact, some people overreact, and I'll go into that in a bit. But we all have very different, unique reactions. So we have to make space for that. And that was very acute at the beginning of the virus. And now we're starting to see the shutters open a bit and thinking, well, how far can I look ahead? Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this is what we're going to cover today. I am going to cover the stretches and challenges we are facing in the workplace. I am keeping an eye on the time as well. Some of the challenges that you may be feeling or facing by leading remotely that might be new to you, or perhaps you've been doing it for a while and it's led you to think about, hang on, is this something I could bring into my organisation in the longer term? We're going to look at how to maintain and increase motivation, culture, and engagement. And actually, whilst it can be a very daunting prospect as a leader to be leading remotely, there's a number of statistics that I'm going to share with you that demonstrate that leading remotely and doing it well can actually increase retention, it can increase motivation, it can increase the goodwill that your employees feel towards your organisation. So it's actually a fantastic opportunity. As they say, never waste a good crisis. So this is an opportunity perhaps to think about, hang on a minute, if this is something I want to bring into a flexible workforce, how do I do that? How do I increase and maintain motivation, culture, and engagement? And I think as well, something that I've been sort of toying with really is that the virus has almost, for many of us, perhaps accelerated that thinking around, well, hang on a minute, what does flexibility look like? What does balance look like? What does that look like now? We are starting to open up, but I think it's a slow road ahead. It's not an overnight change. I think it's sort of proceed with caution and staying alert are the messages that we're getting. But I feel that the virus has almost opened up or accelerated for some industries and some organisations, not all. For example, construction, that's very difficult to do many of those roles remotely, as is obvious. But, you know, we are moving towards a more egalitarian society. If we look at things like gender pay gap, if we look at diversity and inclusion, if we look at everything that's been happening in society, that we are moving, it feels to me, to a more egalitarian way of working. Now, that's not to say we don't have hierarchy, that we don't have structure, because with structure, we're able to know the rules of operation within an organisation and culture, how things get done. But we are more and more, it feels to me, moving away from something that I've been coaching a lot on over the years, a move away from the command and control leadership that were the days of old, the patriarchal society that was in the industrial era. And it feels to me as though the virus has accelerated some of these areas in terms of, well, hang on a minute, what does this mean when I'm working remotely? If you can't see me in person as a leader, if we can't see the structures in operation in the office, then what does that mean for how I lead? And some of the work that I've been called in to do is around some of this work, around sort of possibly outdated models of leadership. Now, every organisation is different, every sector has its nuances. Of course, if you are in a crisis situation, then sometimes that directive, perhaps more of that command and control leadership is required. And I think certainly at the start of the crisis, that was a very good approach for some leaders to take, to show that you are in control, leading, communicating, not necessarily knowing all the answers, but able to be the calm face during this crisis and able to be open and available to your colleagues. So there is a room for that command and control leadership, but much of the work that I've done in the past is about, it's not one size fits all. And I've had to go in and work with teams where that command and control leadership has been overused and is actually demoralizing teams. So now this is a great opportunity for a different way of working, for flexible leadership. And I don't know whether any of you have heard that term before, but being able to flex your leadership style according to the situation. So a little bit about my history. I won't spend too long on this, but I'm an accredited team coach, personal coach, and speaker. I've got 2 diplomas, one on personal coaching, one on corporate leadership coaching and team coaching. and I've also got a diploma in positive psychology. I've got 20 years of experience in some of the organisations mentioned on this slide. From a very young age, I found myself at board level, early 20s, early 30s, and I was the only female in the boardroom. So it's a real baptism by fire. And so I really help female associates plan their careers as well when they're faced with working in a board level environment and raising their voice in the boardroom. And my background is in communications, so working with leaders to help them increase their motivation, employee engagement around the areas of communication. And I've also done a lot of work in crisis communication, which has paid off very well at the moment, I may add. So some of the current challenges that we are facing at the moment, I don't know if they're challenges, but just the situation as it is. Basically, I saw a figure that 49% of the UK workforce is working from home, which is, the statistics say 41% up, but I've also seen other figures saying it's 65%, and I would tend to agree in that higher figure. Obviously, things are shifting now a little bit with companies coming back from bringing back certain people from furlough, but the estimates at the moment are now saying it's about 60% of the workforce in the UK are working from home, and that's, I think the biggest rise was about 41% in 1 week. Construction is the largest sector returning from furlough, and as I've explained, you know, and as we know, some of those sectors just simply can't be working from home because of the nature of their roles. Now, what's been interesting in some of the things that I've observed is that some people are in very different places, as I've already mentioned. For some people, for some employees, they will want to be working from home due to childcare, due to their own fears about their health, their safety, for example. And some people, I've noticed, are begging to come back to the workplace. And much of that is around being able to have the mental and physical space at home. So as a leader, one of the things you might want to do, if you haven't done so already, is really help your colleagues, or find someone that can help your colleagues and share best practice around how you organise your workspace. And I've been encouraging my individual coaching clients to have that conversation as a family, to have that conversation with others in their household to say, how are we going to organise our working day? How are we going to organise that space? And for some of you, you may have noticed that some of your employees may be working a shift pattern. So I've been working with somebody lately whose working day starts at midday because his wife also works and they've got young children at home. So it's about having that flexibility when you're organising your teams. Even if some of them are coming back to work, they may still have those additional responsibilities outside of the traditional working day around looking after family, elderly relatives. Perhaps they've had somebody that's been ill, perhaps they've known somebody that's been unwell or unfortunately passed away during this time. So it's really important to have that open availability and engaging style with your employees, and respecting that working from home brings its own pressures and different people react differently to it. If you're new to it, it can be challenging. Sometimes people feel, I have to work extra longer hours to prove that I'm working, which isn't the case, because sometimes, and I'll show you some statistics later, statistics show that we actually are much more productive working from home. So we need to make sure that our colleagues and teams aren't adding that pressure to us, or feeling the pressure to send emails at funny hours and feel that they have to demonstrate all the time that they are working that set pattern if you've organised a different work pattern with them. And the other thing I want to flag is that I think, legally speaking, if you are bringing people back, for example, then there is a responsibility on you as an employer to make sure that that working environment, it is a healthy and safe working environment. Because by rights, an employee can say, actually, I am concerned for my health, I am concerned for my safety. So that is something to bear in mind. And it is, as I'll say throughout this presentation, very important to have those open dialogues. I've been working with a lady at the moment who is changing her career. This is more on the individual level, because the company she's been working for, when she was furloughed, they just got an email and that was it. And it actually quite shocked me, because I'm somebody that has been working remotely for a very long time. I've been working remotely when I was in my communications role from the early 2000s due to the nature of the job that I was doing. And I think somewhere I had an assumption that many businesses and industries were doing the same. So it's actually comes a big surprise to me about how many people are getting used to working from home, and it is not just a case of putting people into buckets and saying, this person's an introvert, so they're going to love working at home, and this person's an extrovert because they're going to hate working from home. I think we have to recognize there are many nuances in this situation, and we just have to make sure as leaders, as managers, that we're having those open conversations. And as I mentioned, when this team got an email, I've spoken to 2 people now in that team, and they've just said, you know what, I just don't want to go back. I'm going to use my furlough time to look for another role, because why do I want to work for somebody who in the middle of a crisis is just going to send an email and just say, well, it's up to you if you keep in touch or not. No, that's not engaging leadership. I know it's difficult to know what to do, and I understand that as leaders, we're under a lot of pressure to really help our teams through this process. So have those open conversations, understand the other pressures and the intensity and the pressure people can put themselves under, especially those that are high achievers and want to progress. It's really important that teams have breaks. It's really important that they regulate their hours, and it's really important to have routines, and it's really important to maintain connection and dialogue throughout the process. It's really important to have consultation if consultation is needed. So for example, if you have got people working part-time and you're having to recontract, what does that mean for them in terms of them being able to spend spend time working freelance with another company? Have you thought those things through? Maybe think about some of the questions your employees will be asking to have that open and frank dialogue. If you are able just to bring people back part-time, do some of your teams have a passion for volunteering? Is there a cause that your company aligns itself to, that perhaps your employees can do some volunteering towards, and work patterns around that, because that can be extremely engaging. I remember when the virus first broke out, I was working with a company that had a large sales force, and they wanted to maintain the sales force, and they were able to do that without putting people on furlough. So what they decided was to, at the beginning of the crisis, when it first happened, they decided to say to people, we are going to recalibrate your goals. Let's have an open discussion. And they ran some focus groups about what people wanted to see in their goals. And they set a number, they increased the learning and development goals of that team. And they provided extra courses and tools to help people with learning and development. But what they also said was, look, we understand that your sales activities may have dropped away. So we want to take that pressure off you, because we know the majority of our sales force are very proactive. They want to engage with their clients, but we want to sell in a different way. We have to learn to sell with empathy. So they upskilled their workforce in empathetic selling, because it's like, well, I know what empathy is, but how do I do that? So they upskilled the workforce to do that and allowed them time to do that learning and development, which customers absolutely loved, because they were working with doctors who were very overrun, very pressured, and needed to offload. They didn't necessarily need to hear about particular pharmaceutical products. It's like, we know about the products, we just want some support in other ways. And the company itself said to people, do you know what? We are going to allow you to be productive. And they defined what that was in co-creation with their colleagues and their teams for 4 hours of the day, because they knew that people were under stress and pressure. And that was the engagement scores that company got was absolutely fantastic. You may not all be in a position to do that, but that's just an example of how you can shift some of those goals. Now, working from home, one of the key balances of underreaction and overreaction is micromanaging. So coming back to what I said about command and control, that's not going to work in this environment. People, what I'm seeing, want to be involved. They want to be involved, and if they're coming back from furlough, they may be coming back to an organisation that looked very different from the one that they left. So talk them through the changes, get people involved in co-creating your new goals. As a leader, you don't always need to have the answers. So find ways of bringing in people into groups, focus groups, discussions, and, you know, see what ideas they're having, see what they've learned or observed whilst they've been away from talking to friends or colleagues. You know, 70% of leadership contribute, 70% of employees in a recent survey attributed their engagement levels to leadership. So it's really important. And within the first 45 days, 20% of employees leave because they don't feel that engagement from leadership. So it's really important to engage your teams. One technique that I've been using, and some of you may have used this or done this before, is having buddy systems. So we work that through and help people to, I work with a colleague of mine, an associate of mine, to orchestrate buddy programs where that's really about helping people through who are feeling a bit stressed. And you can also give them training. There's listening ears training where people are trained to listen and hear out for when people might be feeling a little uncomfortable, and they can talk to people as a buddy in confidence about whatever's going on for them. They may not want to share that with you as their line manager. So the benefits of working from home. So these are some of the statistics I've mentioned previously. 65% of workers feel more productive in the home office than a normal environment. And that is due to reduced distractions, be that interruptions. And there's some interesting statistics that I'll share with you. Many employers actually report increased productivity of remote working compared to office workers. There's obviously the environmental benefits, as you can see here, and actually some figures are citing that for employees they're saving a lot of money, you know, lunch, food, etc., commuting. You know, I saw a figure that was adding up to over £4,000 a year. Now if you think about that, that's actually something that could be a real incentive for many people and for you as an employer to, you know, to think about how you increase this balance in the longer term. You know, it might be something you're thinking of doing more and more regularly. So for example, I know of a few companies that are doing this. So Fujitsu in London have said, you know what, we are going to adopt a flexible and remote working model from now on. They've changed their model. And I think it's Twitter have also said, you know what, we're noticing more engagement, increased productivity. We feel we could save ourselves some costs as a business on rates and things like that. So we are going to also adopt a working from home policy. However, if people do want to come in, they can come in. So there's lots of benefits all round, really. So 70% of respondents in a recent survey also said maintaining relationships with their co-workers was still important to their jobs. So that's a high percentage. So working remotely still means we have to put an emphasis on relationships. And I would say, as we all probably know, and as Kelly and the team probably know, business is all about relationships. You know, it's about the relationships we have with people. It's about know, like, and trust, you know, whether that's colleagues, clients, suppliers, etc. And there was another statistic that I found this morning, actually, when I was looking, that office workers spent an average of 66 minutes per day discussing non-work topics. Nothing wrong with that, maybe, but remote employees only spent 29 minutes doing the same. It's almost like if you have a meeting that lasts for 6 hours, you're probably going to fill those 6 hours. But actually, you can have a scrum type meeting that's a bit shorter, and perhaps you might get more done. And that's not to say to rush things that require iterative thinking, but I just found that statistic really interesting, that people are still having, you know, non-work conversations, and some people like that. You may have people in your team who, before you start talking about business, you'll need to say, how are you, how's your day, etc., to engage them, because that's what drives their personality. But actually, if you look at that number, about 70 minutes in the office, you know, those bump into each other conversations versus 29 minutes, there is a productivity difference there. So if that's something you're worried about as a leader or a manager, the statistics are telling us otherwise. And actually, there was a statistic as well that said that a lot of those minutes, about half of those minutes, were interruption from leaders or managers. So that's something else to bear in mind as well. What are some of the challenges that employees face? Of course, everybody's in a different situation. Of course, some people prefer to be in the office rather than working from home, and some people prefer working from home. So maybe figure out, what your team's like, what are their individual preferences, because we're not all the same, and some people like a mix and match approach. As I mentioned before, people can put themselves under pressure, so watch out for that. Make sure that colleagues are switching off. 22% in a recent survey, and I've got these sources at the end of the presentation so you can see the surveys, say that switching off is a big issue, and for some people working with mobile technology can be a challenge. I remember when I first started working with a BlackBerry, I felt that because I had it, I had to always be on, and I was sending emails at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I soon realized that by doing that I was creating a rod for my own back, really, because people always expected me to be on. So just watch and ask people as part of your one-to-ones. Make sure you're asking them about how they are. If you feel they are struggling with their balance, ask them about it. Loneliness is another issue, and we want our employees and our teams to be healthy, happy and safe. So if you can help them with this will really increase their engagement with your organisation. Better technology goes without saying, and I'll come on to how we use technology in the future. One of the great things that I've seen is Facebook. Now, some of us have different views about Facebook, but there is an internal Facebook called Workplace. And actually, I was working with a company, and that was great, because what you can do is have different communities, different groups, and it's really lovely to be able to share things, so people were sharing their lunchtime walks. People are entitled to a lunch break. I think particularly in the UK, when we were only allowed 1 hour of exercise outside a day, that was something that was really, really important for health. So it's a really engaging tool for people to see, oh gosh, there's my HR director on her exercise bike, and that might make you feel really uncomfortable, but showing the personal side really relates to that egalitarian ethos I was talking about in the beginning, and seeing the personal side of people. I don't know about you, but I quite like Teams calls or Zoom calls where you can see people's bookshelves, and I think, oh, I wonder what that person's reading. So it's really lovely to see that personal side of business and bringing that in. So Workplace is a really great tool. I think there's different versions you can buy, and you allow different chats and groups. You can actually do live video broadcasts, so you can interact on a live broadcast. So it has lots of engagement tools, and might be worth looking at that. And you can do all sorts of things like test it within a secret page and things like that. But it does help build communities, and it helps you to understand as well, oh gosh, this is what my employees resonate with. And it's not just about broadcasting, it's about engagement, two-way dialogue. So let's not just broadcast, let's encourage two-way dialogue. So you can see all sorts of things that your employees are interested in, and it gives you a really good snapshot of what engages people. So we talked about the business benefits, and there's some interesting statistics there. So as I mentioned before, personability is key, being professional, but also allowing yourself to be a bit more informal as well. There might be a bit less of an office buzz, but you can still recreate that on technology. And really, again, with leadership, it is about walking the walk and talking the talk. So being open, being empathetic, listening, asking questions that you may not have usually asked before. Now, mental health and well-being has been a hot topic over the years. It's become an increasingly hot topic. And again, the virus, that's another area that the virus has exacerbated, to really bring it to the forefront in terms of, okay, I do need to probably check in and ask my team if they're okay. And you may well want to look at the services that you offer to your teams, in terms of, there are online tools such as Mindvalley, lots of different resources that maybe you'd be able to subscribe to and provide to your employees. Mindvalley, Mind Tools is another one. I've been working with a company where I offer laser calls that are like offloading calls, because sometimes as a leader, yes, you want to share and engage with your teams, but sometimes don't feel offended if your employee doesn't want to share everything with you. Sometimes they just want a quiet space. And some companies I know do have professional counselling service. So it might be worth looking at, okay, what do your employees need, maybe having a survey, and identifying different tools, because different people like to engage in different ways. Some people like to engage with remote content or written content, videos. Some people would like actually just to talk to people. The other thing to look at when you are considering technology and what platforms to use is perhaps a bit of simplicity, because I've seen organisations where it's like, you know, they've employed every single tool, and making it perhaps a bit clearer about, okay, well, we use Zoom for this, we use Teams for this, and maybe doing a bit of a needs analysis about which platform will be best for you. Is it Teams? Because that allows for more collaboration of, you know, and that minimises the back and forth email and version control of documents, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed working at home, as I mentioned. So identify perhaps, okay, if we're going to have more people working remotely, which processes disrupt productivity? What habits disrupt productivity? And therefore, what solutions are best for us in terms of how we work as a team, how we run our meetings, and what platforms we use? This is a really interesting report that I found, and I don't know whether some of you have heard of the School of Life. And this is in the very similar vein as School of Life, which really looks at philosophy and how philosophy applies. And this report's called The Virtues of Virtual. And they talk about virtues, you know, and playing them in the terms of excess and deficiency. So, for example, courage sounds very positive, sounds great, but really, if you are very bold and very forthright, a lot of the time that may not be the right thing to do. So not playing your style into excess, but then not playing it to its deficiency. So this is where I think micromanaging comes into play. You can download this, by the way. I think I've put the link at the end. I think you can download the free report, and it really does go much more into the details of this democratization that working remotely does play into. And again, this is about looking at things like micromanagement. You know, am I in danger of micromanaging my team? I know somebody said to me once, you know, I feel like my manager's really micromanaging me, and it is. Regularly in surveys, one of the things that really demoralizes teams and colleagues, it's like, I just feel like I'm being micromanaged. So we need to get that in balance. And again, perhaps that does come back to that open conversation with your teams to say, or your people you're managing to say, okay, how are we going to do this? Two-way conversations rather than I say you do conversations. So as I mentioned, courage can be on one extreme very gung-ho, and at the other end a bit deficient. So it's about finding the balance, and it talks about these different balances and accountability. Obviously that's a word that we use a lot in the work environment. How much accountability do we give to our teams? How much accountability do we want to have from our teams? And how do we balance those out? So we have to make sure that we're not overplaying certain styles, certain techniques, and certain ways of working. And I would put micromanagement at the top of the list. We have to trust, you know, I think sometimes there's a mindset of, I see you, you're working, I don't see you, you're not working. And I hope nobody on this webinar really believes in that, because I think we have to make a difference between quantity and quality. Quantity of emails does not equal productivity. It's about the quality and finding the balance of mechanisms to check in with you. But also in a remote environment, how to give employees opportunities, your high flyers, your successors, and other people in your teams, how to give them opportunities without giving them too much pressure. So I've talked before about co-creation, about how within, and certainly at the beginning of the crisis, I noticed project teams springing up, scrums, different teams scrumming and working together to solve different problems in the workplace, which is great. But actually it led to burnout. And I was coaching a few people and I could just see it in their face. It's like, enough of the calls, you know, it's not about quantity, it's about quality, giving people opportunities to step up, but not overloading them to pressure, particularly when we've got personal things going on. So talked about leading remotely, face-to-face video. I mean, some people don't feel as comfortable with it, but I think really human beings, we all have different preferences, but we are visual creatures. Let's think about collaboration tools, as I mentioned, to reduce that email overwhelm. Teams is a great way of doing that, and having shared spaces as well. Really get that technology into place, because I've seen lots of frustrations in teams. It's like, oh, I want to share this file. I want all of us to be able to input into this file. And it's little things like that that really irk people sometimes. And you can be the best leader in the world, but if the processes and technology aren't there, it can really demotivate people. And if there's somebody who's got a real passion for sorting those kinds of things out, get them involved, get them, you know, without overloading, get them involved in sort of finding new ways of working. Agree your one-to-ones and team meetings. Remember, we want quality, not quantity. Look at the support services. I've mentioned Mind Tools, Mindvalley, I think there are all sorts of different low-cost ways in which you can provide emotional support if you're a smaller business. And again, there are counselling services you can offer to people, because people want to engage in different ways. And again, I've had what I call laser sessions, where people have just said, oh, I've got something on my mind, I just need to talk to somebody 15 minutes who's objective and neutral. So that's something that I have been doing, as well as the buddying programs with organisations. This is learning and development, I think, has shifted over the years. We do still see organised learning and development plans. We should always have a plan, but also in many of the organisations I've worked with, it's about in your pocket learning and development. Learning and development when you want to learn and development. So it's not just top down. It's like, actually, you know, I want to learn about this, some of the softer skills of leadership and development, or technical skills that I need. So I'm going to also organise my own learning and development plan, and that's something you can work with your teams on. So maybe it's the same for this area of support, mental support, mentoring, coaching. Maybe that's, you know, you can provide different ways of people being able to interact with that when they feel it's right for them, rather than to sort of having a one size fits all. Now, the other thing I've been doing as well is some on the spot training with leaders and some organised training around coaching skills. Coaching skills are a really good way of empowering your team, and that's very much about asking open questions, listening, watching body language, mirroring body language. That's where video becomes really important, because you can see the micro movements that people have in their faces. It allows you to be more personable as a leader as well. So coaching skills are a really good way of empowering your teams, rather than always having to have the answers. And not knowing the answers is a great leadership trait, by the way, but empowering your teams to really think for themselves and find their own solutions, which I think is something that's becoming more and more required in this day and age, and certainly emerging as a theme. So think about the different services you can offer across different platforms, and, you know, what learning and development goals you want to set with your team, but also what support you can provide in different mechanisms. Motivation. So, as I've mentioned, let's reframe trust and reframe it in terms of quality, not quantity. Let's reframe it in terms of pace. Let's reframe the working day if we need to, because of looking after relatives, children. Some people might still have to be self-isolating. You know, I know a lot of people, and I'm sure we have, that have had COVID and been very unwell. So, you know, there might be a phased return to work plan for them. So let's really reframe what we consider to be the normal working day, because I think normal went out of the window a long time ago. There's different techniques you can help your teams with, such as how to help them break down their days or routines if they're struggling. Get used to asking different questions in your one-to-ones about how are you coping, what are you finding challenging, what support do you think you might need. They may not need anything, but just keep checking in and maybe asking those questions that you may not have asked before. So I have worked with organisations where the leader has shut down, and despite the fact that the economy is going through some interesting times, people have left. And actually they've left and found jobs, and they're good people. But I think it's really, we all know how costly it is to replace teams. And I think, you know, we want to avoid that and keep people engaged. So focused on the positives, ask your teams, what could I do better? Don't be scared of asking. And as I mentioned, having coaching training is a really good way as a leader. The leader as coach is a really good way to go about that. So, and what else can you do as a leader around culture and engagement? Now, as a leader, it's not always up to you to set the culture. It's about your leadership team as well. And I wonder whether as a team you've got together and still had virtual workshops and virtual team planning workshops, whether you're with an individual team or the leadership team, to really identify or think about your values internally and externally, because values can be very interesting corporate wallpaper, but they can also be things that you live and breathe as an organisation, and you do that by your behaviours and the way that you run your processes, by how you reward and recognise people, amongst many other ways. And it's about leading with example. So really have a think about, you know, how you're leading by example with your values. Think about your values. If your value is honesty, integrity, is that reflected in your communications? Are you sharing leadership with your leadership team? It doesn't always have to be down to one person. You can engage other people who are sort of rising stars in the organisation. I've seen, for example, I was doing the workshop with a team, and we just have someone who is a natural comedian, natural big personality, and really engages people, and people really love him internally. So we're getting other people involved in those kinds of workshops. Public recognition and values. So some statistics here. 63% of employees who are recognised are unlikely to look for a new job, and 40% of employed people would put more energy into their work if they were recognised more often, and 52% of employees feel that their reward strategy are not aligned to values and goals. So that's 52% feel like we're not being recognised in the right way. This doesn't all ladder up to our vision and our values. So it might be worth rethinking about those values and how you want to communicate. And at the moment, open, honest, transparent communication is key. It's okay to say, I don't know the answers. It's okay to get other project teams to be involved in finding solutions. 23% of companies in this survey found that recognition reduced turnover. So let's, you know, how can you make that visual? How can you bring that into social events? How can you bring that into recognition events? This isn't always about big ticket items. I've been working with a leader at the moment who's very keen on, oh, we can start traveling now. Can we do a big bang all together employee event? That sounds great. But actually I said, but look at the surveys. Many of your employees just don't want to travel at the moment or are unable to travel. So really think about why you're doing things and how you're doing them. You can still do a lot of things virtually. I've done a lot of really engaging events and team buildings and virtual parts and quizzes and things like that. It doesn't mean you have to run them. Let your teams run those things organically by themselves as well. So make sure you're recognising as well, and make sure you are publicly continuing to recognise people, and it's aligned to your values and how people want to be recognised. It may not be the big event. It may be Amazon vouchers. It may be time off work. It may be volunteering hours. Speak to your teams and find out how you can do that remotely, and make sure your onboarding is really, really up to scratch. Another thing that I've seen is budgets for equipment and home office equipment. That might be something that you want to do. Competitions, so you can align this with customer activity. That's really engaging in terms of having fun runs. You can have challenges where people do steps challenges, fun runs, and they can post those things on internal social media or intranet. So if you haven't got an intranet, strongly suggest you get something together. And we've had extracurricular activities, so we've used the workforce. It's amazing the different skill sets you can find within your teams and how you can get to know people. They can give TED talks, mindfulness talks, HIT sessions, things like that. I've seen all of this happening. And make sure you're taking the pulse of the organisation regularly. So there's lots and lots of different techniques that you can bring into your organisation, but I would say it's about that balance, flexing your leadership style, being open and communicative, being able to change your style, not having to do everything by yourself, but look at technology, recognition, onboarding, having that one-to-one coaching conversations with your teams, and providing learning and development goals for your teams if your goals need to change, and getting your teams involved without overwhelming. If people don't want to get involved, that's also okay. So I'm going to wrap up here because I think we're near the end of the time, and if there's any questions and answers, happy to take them.
Thank you, Sarah. That was fantastic. There's a lot to think about there, isn't there? Your little wrap up at the end just kind of highlighted that more than anything.
Yeah.
So many different things to think about. I think a lot of the things that came through for me, certainly from what you said, is to just really think more than ever before about communication. It's always been important in leadership, but I think being even more mindful of that than ever before now seems to be the way to win. I loved what you said as well about actually showing a bit of vulnerability and authenticity when you don't know the answers, or you're struggling too, because as leaders we're all human beings, we're all people, and that's, you know, relatable to our teams as well. The other thing that really struck me, which I loved actually, was when you talked about a business you're working with putting in a kind of buddy system, because that's one of the things I think I know I've felt when you're leading a team in person and they're in a room with you, you can quite easily see and feel if someone is demotivated or struggling or finding things difficult. But when you can't see and feel that, it's difficult to know how to help somebody, or to even know that somebody needs help until it's perhaps too late. So things like those, anything opening up those communications channels seems like a really helpful idea.
And even for, you know, leaders and managers, you know, even if you just say, how are you? I know it sounds obvious, but we forget to do that.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was going into coach and somebody said, how are you? And I was like, and they really actively meant that and listened.
Yeah.
And it's just the small things, and even the small thank you are really important. And actually, you know, as a leader as well, there's so much pressure on leaders, financial, we've got all this, you know, corporate responsibility, everything going on in society. It's a difficult time for leaders as well. You know, we're all human beings, so we've got to take time for ourselves as leaders as well.
Yeah, I think often when you ask people how they are, they end up asking it in return, and as leaders you need that too, don't you? So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Okay, I've got a couple of questions for you. We've just got a couple of minutes, so I'll pose a couple of questions to you. Paul has asked whether you had any, and you mentioned a couple of things on the call, but any specific software recommendations that can help to keep teams engaged?
Yeah, I mean, I did mention in terms of software, let's have a think. I think having an intranet, I don't know whether you've got an intranet, and I'm pretty sure for small organisations, there will be companies out there that can do something a little bit off the shelf or bespoke. I would definitely do your research and think about something. If you think about social media, whatever you might think about it, have a look at how people are engaging externally. So one of the things that I've seen work really well is apps. You know, you can get apps produced quite quickly, and sometimes, I mean, it's not something I do, but I know that events companies sometimes produce apps when companies are doing an external, say you're doing, you've got a presence at an external conference, sometimes they have an app to get the internal buzz going about the conference and share photos. So there's some really nice apps you can get that you can either have for a certain period of time, or you can have them ongoing. But I would think, I'm not sure what the pricing is, but whatever you think about Facebook, you know, have a look at how people engage externally. You know, I mean, for younger people, it's all, and actually they're getting their parents to do it, and Judy Dench, TikTok and stuff like that. But have a look at what maybe ask your teams what they might find useful and what's perhaps missing in terms of processes, engagement, and then fit it around, you know, what your employees are telling you. And Facebook, the workplace, is, I think it's really nice. You know, you can have, and I think there's different versions. I think there might even be a free version, and you can have groups where you collaborate. You can have collaboration group. Teams is good for that as well.
And I know you mentioned the collaborative functions on Microsoft Teams, which I know from some of our clients, that depending on what they do, but particularly for shared documents and shared projects, shared task lists, those kind of things, that functionality can be great. And obviously it's nice and simple, but WhatsApp's been a bit of a godsend for our team, just to help the more informal communication and updates.
There is a little difference. You know, you do always have to be mindful about how you communicate, but I don't know, there's just a different vibe in terms of messaging on Teams rather than having to construct a big long email. There's a place for email, but it can get very overwhelming and overcomplicated. And I actually just stop and ask myself, do I need to send this email? Okay.
I pick up the phone? I've got one more question for you just before we run out of time, from Michelle, who, and I guess this is around, you know, when you talked about trying to avoid micromanagement, but with that in mind, I guess, how do you manage not micromanaging, but also managing a problem if there's a perceived lack of productivity from a team member who's working remotely?
Yeah, I think it's about having that regular, being open-minded, because sometimes, and there might be a genuine reason, somebody may not being productive. And I think if you are in touch with your team, engage with your team, you're probably going to notice that. I think it comes across subtly, and I think it will come across in a number of different ways. You know, do they look stressed? Are they continually and chronically late for things? Are they missing deadlines? All those usual telltale signs I think you can apply in the virtual world. But I think it's about having that open and honest dialogue and asking what support people may need, because it might be very easy to make assumptions, but somebody might be a bit scared of telling you, do you know what, I have to drop shopping off. So I would start with putting aside assumptions, but if it continues, you know, start there, and then, you know, talk about, okay, so how are we going to work together? Have it as a sort of equal conversation to start with.
Yeah, all comes back to communication again, I guess.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, that's probably all we've got time for now. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. And if we're not already, also please feel free to connect on LinkedIn with both myself and Sarah. That would be great too. And then we can let you know about any future events that we're running. Other than that, that's all from me. So have a great rest of the day, everybody, rest of the week, and hopefully we'll see you on future events soon.